All right, hi everyone. So nice to have everyone here. Feel free to grab a stool, by the way, if the seating arrangement's not enough. My name is Em, and I use they them pronouns. I am the Education and Public Programs Manager at Tefra Institute of Contemporary Art. It is an honor this evening to be able to host this program. So to tell you a little bit about Tefra Institute of Contemporary Art, we were formerly known as the Greater Ruston Art Center. We are a 501c3 nonprofit institution committed to promoting innovative contemporary art and thinking. Does anyone here, I think somebody here must know, what does Tefra mean? The stuff that comes up from a volcano. So the word Tefra is the matter that erupts from a volcano, and it leaves a volcano and lands upon, nourishes and changes the landscape of the surrounding environment. And this emphasizes their belief in the generation of ideas and growth that the arts can provide. So now I'll turn over to Hannah Barco, our assistant curator, to speak a little more.
Hi. First, I just want to, oh yeah, Shelby, thanks for the applause. Thank you. And for folks on the bench, we do have some seats with backs. If anyone would prefer or need that, feel free to rearrange as you see fit. Casual here, we're here to talk about the art and engage with each other. So make sure that you get what you need. For those who haven't been here before, our restrooms are straight down the hallway past the wine and on the right. And so pleased to have amazing artists here. A few announcements first. Just to say that we do have some space available at the dinner tonight. We've started a new format where we are inviting members and members of the public to join us for a dinner in honor of the artists and this exhibition. And those tickets are $60 for members, $75 for general public. And you can see myself, my colleague Sophia, or Em, who just introduced themselves at any point during the reception if you would like to join for that dinner. It's going to be at True Food, and we'll sort of walk over together around 7:45. So Tefra Institute of Contemporary Art is pleased to present Hacia, Vida, Towards Life, which presents the work of Cognate Collective, Misael Diaz and Amy Sanchez Arteaga, as well as Jose Corona's work here in the gallery. And we are honored to have them here to be in conversation about that work. And I want to just start with a little bit of a reflection on that show, as well as their bios. Cognate Collective develops research projects, public interventions, and experimental pedagogical programs in collaboration with communities across the US-Mexico border region. Since being founded in 2010, their work has interrogated the evolution of the border as it is simultaneously erased by neoliberal economic policies and bolstered through increased militarization, tracing the fallout of this incongruence for migrant communities on either side of the border. As a result, their interdisciplinary projects often address issues of citizenship, migration, informal economies, and popular culture, arguing for understanding the border not as a bifurcating line, but as a region that expands and contracts with the movement of people and objects. They currently are based in San Diego and work between Tijuana, Mexico, and Los Angeles, California. Jose Corona is a queer Latinx artist creating uncategorized and multidisciplinary art spanning installation, performance, and sculpture, and all of the mixtures in between you'll see throughout the show. Jose has exhibited widely in galleries, museums, and public spaces in the United States and internationally, including recent solo exhibitions: All Roads Lead to Rome, 2023 at Eric Dean Gallery at Wabash College in Crawfordsville, Indiana; Sunset Moonlight, 2021 at the Walters Art Museum in Baltimore, Maryland; and Alien Nation, 2017 at the Hirshhorn Museum and Sculpture Garden, presented by Transformer in Washington, DC. And so many more recently. Actually, in 2022, he was named the inaugural Restoring Hope, Restoring Trust Artist in Residence 2023 at Wabash College in Crawfordsville, Indiana. He is a current resident artist of the Creative Alliance in Baltimore. All right, now let's talk about bar. I'm gonna sit down now.
Yes,
Sit
please.
down.
I'm gonna start with some of that same reflection language from the other day. All right. Vividness and vitality, reverence and resistance. The intimacy of both the quotidian and the imagined. A seriousness that does not eclipse brightness or joy. These are some of the qualities of the artwork by Cognitive Collective and Josie Corona that we are so happy to be among together tonight here in the gallery. This exhibition, through that work, this exhibition insists that we are each connected to the challenges faced by immigrants. Through beautiful and familiar objects and images, the exhibition invites solidarity and a deep sense of connectedness and interconnectedness. I feel like that's enough to get us started.
Yeah.
Let's start with interconnectedness. Conjure some beginning points or that means that anyone here wants to share?
Yeah, well, I think one of the first things that was really exciting when we saw all of the work together in this space, which I imagine that some of you go through the exhibition, were like these unexpected. So I knew that we had things in common, like biographically and sort of like topically in terms of our work with you. But what I appreciated when we got into the space was to see like how your objects, while they're sculptural, so clearly are like made by somebody who has a performance practice, right? And like I feel like our objects have that kind of surprising like tone to them often as well. But then even just like aesthetically, like the kind of orange that ran through the show, which like for so in kind of like Latin American ritual is like signifies like creativity or like resolution, right? I think these kinds of different formal choices that we made that show the way that like the specific choices that are made across the work have a deep connection to a sort of I don't know, like sense of like this question of like joy that Hannah is talking about, but this question also of continuity and like connectedness sort of more broadly that I really valued, and I was like so happy when we got to see like your work next to ours.
Yeah. Certainly, likewise, and I think that even just this conversation around the notions of borders and these like man-made divisions and dividers that create these obstacles between people, when in reality, I mean, what are they? Gloria Anzaldúa describes them as open wounds, borders are. And so this idea that like that interconnectedness is also interrupted consistently over and over again. So yeah, I see kind of those threads happening through the work, but you said it so beautifully.
Yeah. Do you have a reflection?
Yeah, I think the ways that we have recently been trying to understand this notion of interconnectedness is also in relation to this indigenous concept of Pinakech, which is a kind of poetic way of understanding how it is that we are all connected, not just to one another, but also to the land, to the environment. Some of the kind of feelings and reflections that are evoked by this concept and this notion are the sense of the fact that when we harm another, when we harm the land, we're harming ourselves. And likewise, when we love another, when we extend love and care for another, it's as though we're caring for ourselves. So it's a kind of indigenous form of understanding, like what has also been known as like the golden rule, right? The sense of really learning how it is that we cannot think of ourselves as separate from others. And I think that that has been a reflection, not just in terms of notions of migration and the border, but also even because of COVID, right? I think this fact of how it is that our well-being was contingent on how people around us were also caring for themselves, how they were caring for others, the fact that the air that they were breathing in, breathing out, also implicated us, and also I think necessitated our understanding of how it is that we needed to address this pandemic, this kind of, moment of crisis as a collective. And that was very challenging. And I think like in many ways, I don't know if we continues to be challenging. I don't know if we really solved it, and I think we were able to stumble our way through it. But I think this notion of interconnection is something that has just been very palpable for us because of our upbringing at the border, where we realize how it is that these communities are just deeply, deeply intertwined, in spite of the fact that there's this arbitrary division that has been drawn across the land. For ourselves, just in our kind of upbringing, growing up, we've seen the evolution of how that line has been militarized, has been legislated, and how that has also evolved from a kind of, a much less rigid, much less militarized understanding to what we see now, and the kind of desire to further impose this divide as something that is meant to divide people. And I think that for us has been really interesting to explore how it is that just communities living at the border just inherently figure out ways of transgressing that and asserting a sense of connection in spite of borders. And I think that for us has always just been so just inspirational, the ways that our families like practice that sense, like not even as a inherent like political gesture, but it is, right? It's like this act of refusing to be divided. And insisting on being connected and just like orienting one's life on that in spite of these kind of violent divides, I think for us has always just been something that inspires us to align our work and our creative practice with that emotion, with that feeling, with that kind of ethic and politics.
Yeah. Can I say the translation? Because I think you forgot. Yeah. So in Lakash is a Mayan idea, and it literally means you are my other me. Yeah, tú eres mi otro yo. Yeah.
Yeah, something I'm picking up on is the word insistence on, and also, even this idea of the pandemic, and it really was quite a huge failure really on our end, right, in the US. And I think that this idea of an insistence despite of, because I think that here, and obviously it's not just here, but because we have this, experience, this North American experience, this US-based experience, there's that element of individuality, which kind of like trumps the idea of interconnectedness in many ways. And I feel like, so it's a constant fight is, kind of like how I view my own work in terms of like always kind of like interrupting that or wanting to put just kind of disturb that normalcy really.
Yeah, and I mean, speaking of challenges and failures, I also think about like this sense of climate change, right? Which I think your work seeks to address, and how that's also a humongous challenge that is not that requires us to address it and to confront it, not as individuals, but as communities, as collectives, as like a global, body, right? Collective body. As organisms, right? That has to do with the land, it has to do with how we relate to one another. And I think it was jarring to look through the pandemic and to realize that, right? Like, oh, this thing where it was seemingly these small things that we could do, and it was really hard. How are we gonna confront these also larger things that are just at our doorstep in terms of needing us to address them? And I think that it was really just like a wonderful I think curatorial decision to bring our work together to really think about how it is that from the everyday there's already gestures that can be made that can hint at how it is that we can understand that sense of interconnection in order to address these larger struggles, whether they be borders, whether it be climate change, whatever it is. Like, I think there's a sense of really needing to insist on that in order to survive, right? Like, in order to live, we need to return and just insist on that sense of being connected to one another.
So I'm curious whether, I know folks had a chance to walk through the show, but there's a lot to take in. And part of the conversation has been about not only how we are all interconnected, but the kind of responsibility that comes with that, but also the invitation to acknowledge or to welcome that interconnectedness. And so I wonder if you could each speak to, even just in brief, because there's so much deep context behind each work. Some of the pieces in the show that invite a kind of participation or an acknowledgement of the viewer's body, or the ways that some of the work in the show also points for us to reflect on our own position within these conversations.
Mhm. Yeah, well, and so this kind of now, all these beautiful words that were brought up, well, how do they connect to the artwork? For me, this kind of colorful work and the vinyls on the windows that are really performances for the camera or elements of past performances. But this idea of also just interrupting the everyday and kind of like engaging viewers where they're at. So oftentimes you encounter this work in outdoor locations, doing kind of like, what you normally would do, which is, existing in space. But for me, with the works on Against the Windows, which is a part of my Climate Immigrant series, I really just wanted to problematize both notions around immigration and climate change without necessarily, sticking with one or the other, but kind of questioning this new, reshuffle that we're kind of existing in, where potentially we're even questioning existing definitions of who an immigrant is, what a body moving through space means in terms of, yesterday or the other day we had a press conference and I mentioned if you are leaving the roaring fires in the West Coast or leaving the rising waters all along the coastline, are those considered a new form of immigrant or migrant person? I'm not necessarily proposing an answer, but it's just questioning these new, again, in this reshuffle, the shifting definitions that I think gives us an opportunity to maybe re-establish our relationship to the land, to our own selves, like how we relate to each other. And oftentimes in these works, I hint at notions of dehumanization by covering the identities of the figures. So oftentimes you can't see their faces, you don't know their identities, you don't know who they are, or their intentions really. But I'm hoping that even by just paying witness to what they're doing, which is very mundane things, walking across space, holding a backpack, sometimes holding babies, then maybe we're just humanizing even. And I think that that's, more than enough just to realize that people are worthy of just being people. And I think that with the removal of these identifiers, potentially inviting audience members to project themselves onto these figures, really all across my work. I think that oftentimes that idea of obfuscation is done very much on purpose to kind of allow for that in between space. Yeah.
And I'm just gonna jump in and keep
Yes.
it wasn't crisply clear that the works that you see here and here, the Mother Scapegoat and the Mother Death Like Mamas, are costumes used in performance.
Yeah, and I call them wearable sculptures. I was like, oh, let me elevate
Sorry,
that. No, yeah. But yeah. And when we were installing them, I actually stuck with me, but I was like, oh my God, these are just performance objects pretending to be sculptures. So really, this kind of ephemera, these leftover things from performances, kind of existing in many lives. But knowing, now that you know this information, knowing that they had lives beyond these white walls, they were out in the world.
Okay, and I'll say, the closing weekend of this show coincides with the annual festival that we host, the Hacia Arts Festival, for which Corona will be presenting the headlining performance with up to 30 performers in wearable garments from 3 bodies of work, which we are so grateful to Respite Community Center for partnering with us and presenting that work as part of the festival. So stay tuned and come back to see them in action.
Yes, May, 3rd week of May, and this will be the festival pathway. So a lot of the work, not necessarily these objects themselves, but you will see familiar elements from here out in the streets. So please.
Another invitation.
Yes.
For an encounter, yeah.
Yeah. I think in terms of the work that we have in the exhibition, so for clarity's sake, there's the candles that we have here on the table, the balloon intervention that's back in the corner, the textile pieces that we have behind us, and a video. And the through line for all of those, so there's actually like a few lines of connection. There could be actually like a choose your own adventure that would be like interesting curatorially through these different works. But one of the primary ones is around just public marketplaces and the function and context that they've given to the spaces that where we have really developed our practice, like swap meets and tianguis and sobre ruedas, in Southern California, and in Baja California, where we have primarily cited our practice. So all of these are objects that are inspired, or created within or have some form of dialogue with public marketplaces. And I think, for that reason, are then sort of scale, right, to the dimension of like the body and like the mobility of those objects within those spaces. In just a few minutes, we're going to do a performance where we activate the candle work that's on the table here. So I think maybe we could talk about, is there like a piece, Hannah, that you think we should like focus on more specifically besides the candles, or should we talk about, what do you think?
Yeah, I know that you really delved into introducing the candles as part of the performance.
Mhm.
So if you want to wait on that, that's
Yeah.
fine either way.
Yeah.
I know that one of the ways I thought about in organization the work, and then maybe you can respond to this,
Yeah, that'll help.
is in the video work, the camera is turned towards the sky.
Mhm.
And so as much as there is a sightedness and a really specific place and context around the place where those videos were taken in, there's also a sense of a shared sky. And this invitation to look up and see even how the land and the world we inhabit crosses the borders in different ways and it connects us.
Yeah, so that's a pair of videos that we shot, first in a public marketplace in Tijuana, in the Mercado Sobre Ruedas Pancho Villa, or like the on wheels market of the Pancho Villa neighborhood in Tijuana. It's one of the oldest in the city, it's one of the largest. And we became really interested after several years of developing projects in that space and of spending time like in the stalls, and sort of like in the spaces, right, of that market, to think about the relationship, the etymological relationship of that space to the word tianguis, which comes from the Nahuatl Tianquitli. The Tianquitli constellation is the name the Mexica gave to the constellation also called the Pleiades, or the Seven Sisters in the Americas. And so we decided that, and it means place of encounter, right? Or
Place of gathering.
place of gathering. And for those of you that know the constellation, it is this like very lovely cluster of stars. And so they're in this close proximity to each other, and so we can see it, we can imagine that, you know, the people, when they gave it this name, that it may have been because they were clustered in such a way that we could imagine the stars exchanging in this way. So we thought it was like this very poetic connection through language. And so we decided that also, because I think this video, this kind of, or this series of videos is like what our work looks like when it's in dialogue with like traditions of the monochrome as well. I think that's another, like the art history geek part of me like wants to point that out. And so we decided that we would make this video where we walked the entire length of the market and then walked back. And so those are the two channels that you see. And then we did that gesture again in Mexico City in the Mercado Lagunilla, which is one of the oldest in the Americas, that has roots and connections to the Tlatelolco market, the great Mercado de Tlatelolco, which was a very important hub of Mesoamerican exchange. And so we sort of go back to this point that for us, we consider to be an important sort of like origin of that form and of that history for our families and, you know, people who grew up between Mexico and the US. Do you want to add anything? Yeah.
I'll also point out, want to make sure folks don't miss on the label that there is also an invitation with the protest balloon to take a balloon with you. And I'm going to take a moment and also just share some of the context before we're actually going to move shortly into it.
Yeah, so one of the things that we do is to, I think, take inspiration from public marketplaces and the objects that exist within the market, and I think are exchanged within the market, that for us also provide these points of connection for immigrant communities, immigrant families like our own, to kind of connect back to home, right, to a homeland elsewhere. So we really like to work within the objects, but also work within the space of the market itself, to activate what is usually understood as a site of recreation, entertainment, and economic exchange, as a site that could also function as an important point of social engagement and even political engagement. So one of the things that we've been doing in our practice since 2016 is actually to establish a kind of micro residency within the swap meet, within the sort of ruedas, within the Andes, to facilitate different sorts of workshops, especially working with immigrant rights organizations. One of those that we were working with in Orange County, Resilience Orange County, worked with us at the Santa Fe Springs swap meet in LA County, to develop a workshop. And as part of that, we wanted to kind of reimagine the aesthetics of protest, to think about how it is that those aesthetics, which, you know, we're all familiar with, like the picket sign, the sign that you hold, like these kinds of objects that are very much embedded in the vernacular of protest, could be adapted to the space of the market, to potentially activate the space of the market as also a space to undertake something like a march or something like a demonstration. So something that would allow participants to see how it is that these spaces have always kind of fulfilled these different functions. If we go back to, you know, the ancient Athenian city-state, the agora, the kind of public square within city-states, is the space where people would go to debate laws, but it was also a marketplace, right? So markets have always fulfilled these different functions. So to kind of return to that very deep history of markets, we thought, let's figure out a way of orchestrating some sort of demonstration, some sort of march that maybe wasn't like angry, but was more like celebratory, and I think was thinking about how it is that we can articulate political demands, make kind of public demands, in a way that's within that context of the market. So interesting collaboration and working with this group, we decided to work with balloons, because it's something that you can hold, something that's visible, something that I think is an object that you encounter within marketplaces, especially with children. Markets are also super intergenerational, so we're like, okay, how can we get little kids to just come over? And oftentimes when little kids come over, then their parents follow, and they're like, oh, now I have to engage with these weird people, because my child really wants this thing. So it's kind of like a way of just getting people curious to come engage with us. So we worked with them to create their own balloons. The prompt for the balloons was, what do we want? And that was just an open-ended question that could be responded to in a variety of different ways by individuals. We invited them to paint their demands on these balloons, and then we undertook a procession through the market as a sort of collective march, demonstration, action within this space. Within a gallery setting, rather than just kind of recreate that, we decided to go back to our own history as little border children, crossing the border sometimes on a nearly daily basis. And the fact that when you cross the border at the checkpoint, the first question that you often get asked is citizenship as a question, right? It's an opportunity or a demand for you to articulate your citizenship, your kind of sense of solidarity with a certain nation, with a certain kind of collective political community. And so the response would often be American citizen. And we would actually have this joke / like thing that we kind of, you know, instituted in certain instances.
Well, also, if like often growing up, if you were to say American citizen, it would, and you said it like, well, like if I didn't say like, I didn't, right? If I said it in English with the accent that I have now, it would just expedite your crossing. Like the immigration official would say like, okay, you know, like, go ahead and cross. And so we had like family members who sometimes we knew that the crossing would be like this contentious and like long thing, but if they didn't, and they had like the paperwork and everything, but it was like to expedite things and to get people to the US like for the day to have like dinner or whatever, it'd be like, okay, I'm gonna tell my great aunt to just say American citizen and say it with like a clear like US American accent to like expedite this process. And so for a long time we thought about it as like this really funny like shibboleth or like sort of like it put like a
con.
And then we realized that the Americas are continents, right? Like that we have this I think we expanded our understanding of America to this continental understanding, which I think for the people of the Americas that don't live in the US, right? Like the Americas are also their home, and realize like, yeah, it wasn't, we were like planet all.
like my aunt is an American citizen. She lives in the los Estados Unidos Americanos de Mexico, right? So, so I think reflecting on that notion, and also like the sort of co-opting of America and making that this kind of very monolithic idea, we sort of play with that, and so you're invited to take a balloon, and please use a balloon weight. That's usually
Get away from
like fly away from you. And yeah, so that's also available for the public to engage with.
And to take away as also a way of kind of asserting the sense of citizenship that thinks more expansively about what that could mean.
Yeah.
So I need time for anyone in our live audience or our Zoom audience, who may have a question for our artists, and there will be also time to informally, of course, be in conversation. Any Zoom questions? No questions. Anyone have something? Shelley?
Okay, so I'm kind of interested in like the presence of fabric and weaving and this particular material and the idea of the border as the wound. And I'm thinking like, what does mending the wound mean? And you think about people crossing or almost like stitches, attempting over and over again, back and forth to mend this wound and being subjected to cutting by the US government and like releasing that wound, keeping it open. So I'm curious to know about your material interest, why these materials, and if you have a sense of that. I don't know, these were just thoughts I was having.
Yeah, well, for me, yes to all those things, right? And I think that for me, the fabric and fabrics, plural, really came into play. Well, I was trained originally as a painter, so I feel like even canvas being a fabric, right, that was very much medium that was needed to produce that work. But as soon as I kind of deviated into performance art, it really, suddenly the body became the sole kind of like conduit for this work, right? So it started with just kind of like throwing actually those early canvases over the body and playing around with that idea. But quickly I realized that, with performance art, it's so vulnerable and you're putting yourself out in the line. And that our understanding of fabric was almost universal, right? That like, even if you feel very separate from the artwork on the wall or on these forms, we put on clothing every single day, so like, even if we're not aware of it, we are so familiar with its feel, with its different qualities, and in many ways, an extension of our own performances. So while I'm calling myself a performance artist or that the work is performative, we all made choices this morning when we, put ourselves together to come here. So I think that that's how fabric has entered my realm. And certainly this idea of clothing now, from going from fabric to like this idea of clothing, is really kind of present throughout. The Climate Immigrant series actually started with these wearables that are actually across from the balloon station, but with these wearables that I call them climate ponchos. But this idea of clothing as, it brings up ideas around home, shelter, protection. So all of those qualities I think are always integral to the work that I'm creating. So that would be, my kind of entryway into it.
Thank you.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think to speak about our work, this morning we were facilitating an embroidery workshop. So yes, the stitching together, the traversing of this fabric backwards and forwards is definitely something that we think about as a metaphor.
Yeah.
And I think has been beautifully, articulated by other groups and other artists, like the Border Arts Workshop, that De Fronterizo has this really beautiful piece called Border Sutures, that are these metallic sculptures that they actually drilled and like forced into the ground all across the border to maintain the land together as it was being pulled apart in the early 90s. A site when people were just crossing by saying American citizen and not having to present like all their documents all the time, right? So there's an idea of the divide and wanting to maintain and suture this land together, suture communities together, is something that I think there's a long legacy of that, and I think we're definitely inspired by that work and thinking about ways of continuing to assert that today.
I also think like in Spanish, el bordo is a way of referring to the border, and bordar, right, like the verb, is to embroider. So I think like, so we think about it. And these are telas para bordar, right? So they're like fabrics to be embroidered. So that metaphor is definitely present.
was wondering about the colors. You mentioned, when you talked about orange, the vibrancy of that with the kind of the reason, the history and went with the art history background. I was curious. What is for blue, black and yellow, or green, sorry, and yellow? Is there similar reasoning and thoughts, et cetera, into why you pick those colors?
So you know what, for me, I work in series space format, so there are upwards of 20 of these, somewhere in my studio or in storage. So for me, it's just about the vibrancy element of it and really this kind of like joyful celebration, natural celebration, a blooming field of flowers, like the world is ending and all of this apocalyptic talk and the flowers are sprouting, you know what I mean? Like nature is thriving. So I don't necessarily think that nature is kind of like going down with us. So just this idea to infuse this vibrancy for me. And I think that obviously having a painterly background, it never ceases to amaze me. We have plenty of options, but the primaries are always centering, like just color in general. And I think that for me, when I immigrated to the United States, it was at a very early age when I was 6 years old. But you kind of become very hyper aware when you're so young, just because you sense that something is shifting. So for me, it was actually through painting that I realized that a lot of this stuff was actually just coming through those early memories, like the bright use of color, these local colors that are so popular, like all across Mexico. And I remember early on in my actual schooling, art school schooling, kind of there a lot of pushback against the blunt color usage, like, oh, don't you want to mute it a little bit? Don't you want to like pare it down? And I somehow didn't jive with that. So I remember this one time somebody made a comment, and it was not necessarily supposed to be taken as a positive. They were like, your work is so Mexican. And so I took that as an opportunity to be like, oh, do you mean sophisticated and well done? You know what I mean? So it's like counteracting that idea. But yeah, I think color in general is just such a joyful element. And certainly there are a lot of, but you know what? I was gonna say there are a lot of connotations with certain colors, but that also changes from person to person, from culture to culture. But certainly you hear about like, oh, red makes you hungry, or you know what I mean? So like there are certain elements in there, but again, for me, the vibrancy, the loudness, and oftentimes the work is quiet in the sense that there's not a lot of vocalization or engagement with the actual viewer other than through the visuals. And I think that again, that's my very visual background coming through.
I have a question. Can you talk a little bit about the ponchos, the transparent ponchos, because it looks like there are layers and layers of stories and something that you carry with you.
Yeah, and so that was the beginning of the climate immigrant series, which we also see behind us in the windows. But the ones on the windows are an outcome of the pandemic when I couldn't necessarily go out there and do performances. But that's actually the kind of like the original ones, these clear ones that you saw are out there. And again, the same notions, the idea of protection, of home, of shelter is really how and the rudimentary element of is just two pieces of fabric. I mean, this is plastic fabric, but a fabric just put together with a hole cut in the center, right? It's like such a rudimentary form to protect ourselves, to cover ourselves. So that was kind of like the impetus for it, but also that they are very much a part of performances. So here you're seeing them as objects, but they would be worn on the body and traverse through space. So again, just hinting at really in that series, I'm honing in on the archetype of the traveler. So I oftentimes, with all of the work that you see here that's colorful, is kind of looking at archetypes. So there is just the archetype of the traveler. So instead of thinking about any one particular group, just boiling it down to that very broad and general group, which is all of us, that image could be you coming here, you walking in the square, you at the airport, potentially you crossing a border, or just, taking a hike out in nature. For me, I'm not necessarily differentiating between, again, what is an immigrant and what is just walking around, right? But just connecting us back to that very simple idea of we are existing now, we are here together, and we share this space. And again, elements of the floral elements are always present, again, a joyful element. But also I think that the figures are obviously always going somewhere, they're thrusting forward. And that's already such a hopeful visual, right? Because it's like, they're not stagnant. There is something better. There's a vision, that future that they're going towards. We ourselves are not privy to what that is. But, again, we're just kind of paying witness to whatever this journey might be. But again, for me, just the identities are not there. They're just silhouetted, and that we are just paying witness and potentially realizing that, yeah, we're all human, just crossing space. Yeah.
So
There's a question on the chat.
okay.
Sorry, you can go ahead first.
Okay. Something that caught my attention is that in this picture, there are two sides of the immigration. One is leaving and the other one is arriving. And I can see that mostly all of them are from the point of view of leaving. You are looking the back of the people because every time somebody immigrates, that person is leaving something behind. And it's very hard. And then, of course, always thinking that you're going to arrive in a place. But I love the way you approach that from the back.
Thank you so much. Yeah. And actually, yeah, that's very poignant, right? That's like that they're leaving. And again, for us, we don't know what that is, but that they are leaving people behind, loved ones, even items, objects. But, and also, again, they're thrusting forward into the unknown, right? And even though the settings look beautiful and there's floral elements and it's thriving, there's also, I think, a sense, like an ominous sense, like there might be danger lurking, but it's not obvious, it's not present. So yeah, I love that you picked up on that. And again, tying back to this journey, right? The journey that each one of us is on, but a journey.
We'll take the last question from the chat.
Yes, so the question is actually from Janelle Hauser, the executive director. I'm curator of Temper ICA, who unfortunately couldn't be here today because she is sick with the flu. She asked, hi Amy, Misael, and Josie, thank you so much for sharing your work with us. There's so many critical pressing issues of today addressed in your practice, which I really appreciate. Is there anything general or specific you'd like the audience to walk away with once they encounter your work in there?
A balloon.
Yeah.
Physical object.
I think the other thing that is, like a connective tissue of this like body of exhibition, is, right, like, I think often so there's a wonderful writer, her name is Macarena Gomez Varis, and she wrote a wonderful book called The Extractive Zone, where she writes about, it's primarily work from South America, but a lot of communities that have been affected by both extractivist politics and then also like these crises of like climate change. And so she says that for those communities, right, like the apocalypse isn't looming, it's already happened. Like for them, their like homeland has been flooded because of the construction of a dam. There's no way to go home, and so they've been dislocated. Or like like ancestral like sacred plants no longer exist because of over harvestation. So these apocalypses, these crises have occurred, and they're already living in a post-apocalyptic way, right? And yet these are communities that are finding ways to be resourceful, to be joyful, and to create like life, and to create like a futurity for themselves. And so I guess if anything, when somebody sees my work, I want them to come away with an understanding that like we make like the bridge of life sort of as we walk it, which is another thing that Antigua writes in this bridge called My Back. So I don't know, I think that there's like apocalypses, right, that we may live, and yet like I'm sitting here and you're sitting here and you're all sitting here and we're breathing and we have the capacity to make life a little bit more like livable just for each other, you know? So I think yeah, that's what I want people to think about.
And I think backing off of this is, I've used that idea, right? Like, yes, and I'm gonna have to get that name again, just because, yeah, this notion, and again, tying it back to our place here in the US, and I think that, again, this idea of the apocalypse is coming, or like the world is ending, is a very white supremacist, like, notion, right? Because it's going to be destabilized by those at the very top, of those in power, those who have those privileges. But as you're mentioning, that's not true across the board. So similarly, I think that, yeah, just, I think that with my figures that are all obfuscated, whether they're standing as sculptures or the 2D visuals, to kind of, consider that visioning of a better future, that there is, maybe even elements of fear when you can't see again what the identities of these people are, then maybe we give ourselves a little bit more nuance in how we relate to each other. And I mean, yeah, hope and joy, right? That's like the best thing that is I can hope for you to take from the exhibit.
Wow, y'all. There's so much to talk about. We are at time and we have to keep on time because we have another piece of the program tonight, which is a performance of the candle, an activation of the candle installation by Cognate. So
Yeah, so come in just a few minutes, you can light a candle with a star.
yeah, exactly that. So take about 5 minutes. We'll regather. Staff is going to clear chairs. So I am going to ask you to stand up and explore the exhibition. So we can make space, and then there will be an activation here at the panels.